so let's say, for example, use the half angle formula to find cosine of 165 degrees. So again, since we're using the half angle formula, you want to let your theta divided by 2 equal 165 degrees. Remember, we want to use the cosine of theta over 2. So if we multiply both sides by 2, it means your theta is going to equal 330 degrees. Okay, so we know our cosine of theta divided by 2 is equal to plus or minus the square root of 1 plus cosine of theta divided by 2. Which is equal to plus or minus the square root of 1 plus cosine of 330 degrees divided by 2. Okay. So we know cosine of 330 degrees is square root of 3 over 2. So that's equal to plus or minus the square root of 1 plus square root of 3 over 2 divided by 2. Okay, and just like we did before, we can make that equal to 2 over 2. So that's equal to plus or minus the square root of 2 plus square root of 3 divided by 2, and that's divided by 2. Make that a little bit bigger. Okay, which means if we wanted to, we can make that plus or minus the square root of 2 plus square root of 3 divided by 2 times the reciprocal, which is 1/4. 1/2. Kind of jumping ahead to the next step. Okay, which makes that plus or minus 2, well, the square root of 2 plus square root of 3 over 4. So you can have the square root of 4 here. So you have plus or minus the square root of 2 plus square root of 3 over 2. And the only reason you don't change the plus or minus is because they didn't tell you what quadrant it's in. If they told you it was in quadrant 2, then you know x equals cosine of theta would be negative. So then you'd use the negative. So if they don't tell you which quadrant, then you keep the plus or minus. All right, so any questions on that one? There we go. All right, so for our next example, let's say use a half angle formula to find tangent of 15 degrees. So just like before, since you're using a half angle formula, we're going to let theta over 2 equal 15 degrees. Which means we multiply both sides by 2. Our theta is equal to 30. Okay, so we know that tangent of theta divided by 2 is equal to sine of theta over 1 plus cosine of theta. Okay, which means that's going to equal sine of 30 degrees over 1 plus cosine of 30 degrees. Okay, where cosine, well, you might as well say sine of 30 degrees is 1/2, and cosine of 30 degrees is square root of 3 over 2. Okay, so that's our 1/2 divided by 1 plus square root of 3 over 2. Okay, so again, if we made that 2 over 2, that would be 1/2 divided by 2 plus square root of 3 over 2. Shorten that up a little bit. Which is equal to 1/2 times the reciprocal of your denominator, which is 2 over 2 plus square root of 3, which is 1 over 2 plus square root of 3. Okay. Or if you wanted to rationalize the denominator, we could do that also. So you have 1 over 2 plus square root of 3. You're going to multiply by 2 minus square root of 3 over 2 minus square root of 3. Okay, so your numerator just becomes 2 minus square root of 3, since it just multiplied by 1. You have your first, which is 4. You have your outer and inner, which cancels out. And your last, which is 3. So it's 2 minus square root of 3. All right. So any questions on that one? Let me write out there. Okay. Okay, so what about the problem if they actually do give us a quadrant? All right, let me get a little more paper here. Okay, so let's say, for example, if sine of theta is equal to -5/13, and theta is in quadrant 4, then what is tangent of theta divided by 2? Okay. So again, we want to know what our, actually, first part here will probably be easier if we found out our reference triangle. Usually makes things a little bit easier. Okay, and we can make our reference triangle, because we know sine of theta is equal to -5/13. Remember, sine of theta equals opposite over hypotenuse. And it's in quadrant 4. Okay, so if we're looking in quadrant 4, this would be our triangle. And this would be our theta. Which means your opposite would be 5. And your hypotenuse would be 13. Yep, clean that up just a bit. Okay, so if you use the Pythagorean theorem, you can solve for this missing side, which ends up being 12. So solve using Pythagorean theorem. Okay, so now we have our sine of theta, which is -5/13. And we can now find our cosine of theta. Remember, that's adjacent over hypotenuse, so that would be 12/13. Okay, so next we can actually plug it into our tangent formula. Uh-oh. There we go. Okay, so we know our tangent, theta divided by 2, is equal to sine of theta over 1 plus cosine of theta. Okay, so our sine of theta, we already know that's -5/13. Divided by 1 plus our cosine of theta. We were able to find that. That's 12/13. Okay, and we do just like we did before. Kind of simplify this entire thing. So you have -5/13 divided by, make that 1 13/13. So you have 13 plus 12/13. So that's 25/13. Shorten that up a little bit. Okay, which is equal to -5/13 times the reciprocal of that one, which is 13/25. Those two cancel out. So you end up with -5/25, which is just -1/5. Okay. And that can stay negative because we know that in quadrant 4, our tangent is negative. All right, so any questions on that one? All right. Okay, so now we're going to start. Oh, I have to give the formula first. Say sum to product and product to sum. So really, we're going to take the sum of two trig functions and convert them to a product of trig functions. So if we have sine of A plus sine of B, that's going to equal 2 times sine of A plus B over 2 times cosine of A minus B over 2. If you have sine of A minus sine of B, it's going to equal 2 times cosine of A plus B over 2 times sine of A minus B over 2. Okay. So the only thing that changes between plus and minus is your sine and cosine kind of switch places. Or if you have cosine of A plus cosine of B, that's going to equal 2 times cosine of A plus B over 2 times cosine of A minus B over 2. And if you have cosine of A minus cosine of B, that's going to equal 2, or negative 2 actually. Times sine, I'm mixing those up, of A plus B over 2 times sine of A minus B over 2. Okay. So that's where you take the sum and convert it to multiplication. This is still considered sum because you can make it plus negative, so even though it's subtraction, it's still called sum. Okay. So let's say, for example, if you wanted to write the sum, cosine of 5x plus cosine of 3x as a product. Okay. So we're adding, so we're going to use the cosine of A plus cosine of B. Cosine of A plus cosine of B equals 2 times cosine of A plus B over 2 times cosine of A minus B over 2. Okay. So if we have cosine of 5x plus cosine of 3x, and we let 5x equal our A and 3x equal our B, it's going to equal 2 times cosine of 5x plus 3x over 2 times cosine of 5x minus 3x over 2. Okay, so that's just going to equal 2. 5x plus 3x is 8x, so that gives us cosine of 4x times cosine 5x minus 3x is 2x. 2x divided by 2 is just x. And that's your final answer. All right, so any questions on that one? Usually with this section, the hardest part is remembering all of them. Actually applying them isn't as bad as trying to remember all the little details of each one. All right, so let's do one more example. Everyone's still writing. Okay. Okay, so for example, say you want to write 4 cosine of theta minus 4 cosine of 3 theta as a product. Okay, so with this one, the first thing I do is factor out a 4. Okay, so you have 4 times cosine of theta minus cosine of 3 theta. Okay, so now you can use your sum to product. Okay, so let me write it over here. Remember, cosine of A minus cosine of B is negative 2 times sine of A plus B over 2 times sine of A minus B over 2. Okay, so this gives us 4. You make that I guess I can go ahead and rewrite it. If you make that your A and that your B, okay, so that would be 4. That's going to run into that, so let me move that up a little bit. There we go. 4 times negative 2 times sine of A plus B over 2, so that's theta plus 3 theta over 2. Times sine of A minus B over 2. So theta minus 3 theta over 2. Okay, so we can just go ahead and multiply those two. So you have negative 8 times sine theta plus 3 theta is 4 theta. 4 theta divided by 2 is 2 theta. Times sine theta minus 3 theta is negative 2 theta. Negative 2 theta divided by 2 is negative theta. Okay. But this one, if you put it in this way, they probably mark it wrong, only because sine is an odd function. Okay. So whenever you have an odd function, that means sine of negative theta is going to equal negative sine of theta. Okay, so that negative comes out to the front. So you have negative 8 sine of 2 theta times negative sine of theta, where these two negatives just cancel each other out. Okay, so you have 8 sine of 2 theta sine of theta. All right, so any questions on that one? All right. Bring that down a little bit. And the proof for the product of sum and sum to product, I'll add to the notes. All right, so our product of sum anyone's still writing. Okay, so your product of sum sine of x, sine of y means sine of A, times cosine of B is equal to sine of A plus B plus sine of A minus B divided by 2. Sine of A times sine of B. And if you wanted to, you can make that 1/2 times that. So it would be 1/2 times cosine of A minus B minus cosine of A plus B. Okay. So if you want to make it divided by 2 or multiply by 1/2, whichever way works. Okay. Now if you had cosine of A times cosine of B, that would equal 1/2 cosine of A plus B plus cosine of A minus B. All right, so let's say, for example, if you wanted to convert 6 times sine of x cosine of 5x to a sum. Okay. So you have a sine and cosine being multiplied, so you know you're going to use the first one. Okay, so 6 sine of x cosine of 5x. You're going to let your sine, that x, equal A. And your 5x equal B. Okay. So that's going to equal sine of x plus 5x plus sine of x minus 5x divided by 2, or you can multiply it by 1/2, whichever one works for you. I'll say 1/2 times that. Okay. Oh, forgot my 6. Actually, I'm going to move that over just a little bit because I forgot to multiply the 6. And don't want to try and squeeze it in there. I'd rather have it in there the normal way. So 6 sine of x cosine of 5x equals 6 times that. There we go. So we have your A, and we have our B. Okay. So now if we go ahead and multiply our 6 and our 1/2, that just gives us 3 times sine of x plus 5x, 6x, plus x minus 5x, sine of negative 4x. Okay. Now remember, sine is an odd function, so that negative will go out to the front. Make a little note here. Sine of negative 4x equals negative sine of 4x. So this actually becomes 3 times sine of 6